A couple of weeks ago, Ryan and I launched our Roadrunner, a classic runabout boat that we built ourselves from a DIY kit that our friends at Chesapeake Lightcraft have designed and now sell to anyone who wants to build it. As it turns out, there is a whole world out there of people building their own wooden boat because, as I get to find out, there are few things in life that are more satisfying than seeing your boat come to life for every moment that you spend building it. But only a year ago, I was completely unaware of it because, well, I was probably the world's most unhandy person. In fact, I lived in Sweden for 12 years and I am still to put together an IKEA shelf, so yeah. That's the level of skills that we were dealing with. And on a beautiful spring day of 2023, when we had just moved to Annapolis in Maryland, we randomly pushed the doors of Chesapeake Lightcraft, a local company that, as it turns out, is the world's largest manufacturer of boat kits that you can build yourself. Literally the IKEA of small wooden boats. But as opposed to an éplateux sofa or a skruvbu cabinet, whose name I can pronounce, as opposed to actually putting them into a functional piece of furniture, well, the Chesapeake Lightcraft catalog gave me all the incentive I needed to unleash my inner Bob the Builder. Because the night that we came home from our random visit to the shop, I was browsing the Chesapeake Lightcraft catalog when the last page stopped me in my tracks. And right there and then, I knew.
I'm gonna build this boat, and I'm gonna make it electric.
When I told the team at Chesapeake Lightcraft about my project, I am pretty sure that Ed, the president of Chesapeake Lightcraft, saw me roll into the shop with my absolute lack of skills combined with a severe case of overconfidence and probably told himself,
"Wow, that's brave."
So we quickly concluded that we should work together. They would supply the kit and we would record the entire process from start to finish. Now, the Roadrunner catalog page announces an estimated build time of 250 hours, and I was like...
250 hours, that's like 4 weeks of full-time work between Ryan and I. I can totally pull that off.
They have no idea what they're getting into.
Ed was right. So today, we're going to talk about how to get started in DIY boat building for noobs like me. I'll cover the skills we had to learn and everything we should have thought about, from the building space, the tools, the budget, and the time that one needs to go from a pile of wood to launching a boat, because I had not done that. The reason why it is possible for people with no experience to build beautiful little wooden boats in a cost-efficient way is because of a technique that makes it super easy, called stitch and glue. And I'm going to let Andrew, our boat building teacher, explain what that means.
So most of the kits that we do are stitch and glue construction, which means that we're temporarily fastening frames and panels and all the components with copper wire. And that allows us to temporarily fasten those areas in between those wires with epoxy, and then we can remove all of that wiring and then continue the boat building from there. So the stitch and glue process makes it extremely easy for a home builder or somebody with little to no experience in boat building to basically produce a hull shape from plywood.
There are 2 levels of stitch and glue kits that you can get from Chesapeake Lightcraft. The regular kits that come with an extremely detailed building manual. Those detailed manuals are complete with step-by-step instructions and tutorials for all the skills that you need to build the boat. The level of details in those manuals is absolutely unmatched, and that is what makes Chesapeake Lightcraft unique as a manufacturer of DIY boat kits. You do not need to buy a kit to buy the building manual, and they cost almost nothing. Okay, so that's for most of the boat that you can build with a Chesapeake Lightcraft kit. And then when you go a little deeper in the catalog, you have what are called the pro kits. Kits that are a little more advanced, a little bigger, a little more technical. And the premise is that you already have the skills and you know what you're doing, because the manual that comes with pro kits is this. So now that we've established the level of skills that I entered this project with and where in the catalog I found the kits, well, you can probably guess where this story is going.
So the Roadrunner, the construction process between those sailboats and the traditional runabout is exactly the same. The only thing different is, honestly, that's just a part count. So it'll be a fun-packed 8 weeks of sanding and coating and sanding and coating, but we'll start with doing a bunch of prep work, and then we'll actually start the whole construction process. We'll take all these pre-coated parts and then we'll stitch them together. From there, we'll start doing some fiberglass work. We'll do a bunch of fillet work. And then once we're done with 200 hours of sanding and coating, then maybe we'll start to do some painting. And then the fun part, we'll do the rigging, where we'll hang the outboard, we'll install the electronics, we'll start making it look like something.
Pretty think is going to be better at boat building, me or Ryan?
Generally, women are better at boat building. I mean, I've built hundreds of these boats in classes with people, and the women, they listen when I'm speaking. So they generally end up with a nicer product when they're leaving the room. So I would have to go with Sophie.
As I mentioned earlier, most of the Chesapeake Lightcraft kits are designed to be stitched and glued, which involves a very specific set of skills. None of those skills are particularly hard to acquire, but becoming good at those skills is what makes the difference between a tedious process that will yield average results and a boat that is beautifully finished with great details without losing your sanity sanding. %90 of the building process consists in 4 steps. Prep the wooden part by sanding it, apply a coat of epoxy to the wooden part to seal it and let it cure, prep the part for the next step by sanding it, glue it with epoxy to the boat structure. In other words, sand, epoxy, sand, maybe fiberglass, sand, and repeat. So let's talk about epoxy, because she is a wooden boat, but oh boy, did I mix a lot of epoxy. There are a lot of different formulations and brands of epoxy out there, but they all pretty much work the same way. Epoxy resin is mixed with a hardener, which creates a chemical reaction that transforms the liquid resin into a rock-solid adhesive once it's cured. The first function of epoxy resin in boat building is to protect the wood of the boat against environmental elements, such as UV radiation, salt, corrosion, and of course, moisture. Ideally, we want to work with a resin that has low VOC, or low volatile organic compounds, meaning that it doesn't release a ton of strong and toxic fumes, so that your garage doesn't end up smelling like a nail polish factory. And we do not want our resin to produce a tacky, waxy layer called blush when it cures. It just makes things a lot nicer, a lot easier. But for us in particular, amateur DIY boat builder, it is important that the epoxy we use has excellent self-leveling properties so that the layer we create on top of the wood is nice, even, but also thick enough that it is easy to put a good grit in it with sandpaper. It needs to be liquid enough that it penetrates the wood fiber a little bit deeper so that when it cures, the wood is stronger and the boat ends up with better structural integrity, but not too liquid or too thick, because that would just make it harder to work with. So what we're looking for is called a low viscosity resin. And the one aspect that makes epoxy really great for us amateur boat builders is a user-friendly mixing ratio. Okay, so if the mixing ratio of an epoxy is 5:1, meaning 5 parts epoxy for 1 part hardener, it is a lot easier to mess up the proportions than when the mixing ratio is 2:1. And messing up your mixing ratio means that you could potentially have problems with the curing of the epoxy or even its structural integrity. The resin that we use on our Roadrunner and the one that comes with Chesapeake Lightcraft kits is mass epoxy. And for all the reasons mentioned above, both Andrew, myself, and Ryan think that it's the best resin to build boats with. Mass epoxy has a 2:1 mixing ratio and comes with pumps that are already adjusted to dispense the correct ratio. So 1 push of the resin pump and 1 push of the hardener pump gives the exact ratio that you need, which makes it completely foolproof and easy to mix both small batches and big batches. And so once the epoxy is mixed, this is how we use it. First off, clear coating. Clear coating is the act of applying a layer of epoxy to the wood to seal and reinforce it. Every single part of the kit is at the very minimum clear coated with slow curing epoxy and sanded before being assembled. And as with all epoxy skills, I found that the challenge with clear coating was to apply just the right amount of epoxy and work it on the surface so that you get that nice, thick and even layer without producing any drips, or worse, letting them cure. Because those drips will eventually need to be sanded down, and that's a pain. Many of the boat's major structural parts, such as the transom, the deck, the bottom of the hull, and the rim between the hull and the topsides, are fiberglassed to make them extra sturdy. Good fiberglassing means saturating the fiberglass cloth with epoxy and working the excess material out with a scraper so that the cloth doesn't end up floating on top of the epoxy, all while avoiding dry patches, air bubble, or too much stretching. Now, because the Roadrunner is 14 feet long, some parts that needed fiberglassing were absolutely massive. And I'm glad that we were at least 2 people working on that project simultaneously, because I don't think that I could have managed to work the epoxy alone in the fiberglass without it starting to cure while still trying to work it. And that would have been a disaster. All right, third, filleting. So when the boat is stitched and all the parts are coming together, they are glued to the hull with a technique called filleting. Filleting involves applying epoxy that has been thickened with wood flour to a joint to create a nicely rounded seam. Good fillets should make the boat strong and watertight, but they also should be smooth, consistent, and ideally straight. A good fillet looks seamless. It's completely invisible. A bad fillet looks like the drawing of a 4-year-old hanging on the fridge of a newly renovated kitchen. It was made with love, but it kind of sticks out. And talking about 4-year-old, sometimes you end up miscalculating how much epoxy you need for your fillet, and you just have that little too much material, and it's in a piping bag, and it's curing, and you have 2 minutes to decide what to do with it, so why not make a fake poop?
So over the weeks, we have made a bunch of different poops with our boo-boos, and every poop has a story.
Then randomly leave them around the house next time your friends invite you over for dinner, and that will be a wonderful way to show off your new skills.
This is nice poop.
There's a part of my soul that stayed somewhere in all the dust I've produced over the last few months, and
Once we're done with 200 hours of sanding,
I will never be the same again. But good sanding is how we were able to keep the hull varnished as opposed to having to paint it to hide the boogers. Sanding has 2 functions. 1, fairing, meaning that we want to create a surface that is nice and smooth and free of bumps, like, the drips of epoxy. And 2, it roughens the material's surface to provide a better grip for the next layer, whether that is more epoxy, fiberglass, paint, or varnish. The art of sanding is to know what tool to use between the hard block, the soft block, the orbital sander, or sometimes even a little sandpaper on a stick. What grit to use and where, and how long and how much without going through the epoxy and burning the epoxy, going through the wood. And good sanding is really what makes the difference between a rougher looking boat and one that looks straight out of Chris Craft. And it is the perfect activity to not only unleash, but also legitimize your inner masochist OCD. Did I spend way too much time sanding? Yes. Did I enjoy it? No. Would I do it again? Absolutely yes. So where do you build a boat? When I got the idea to build our boat, we were still living on board Polar Seal, and I thought that I could build our kit absolutely everywhere. It didn't matter too much, but it made its way into this video, so now you know that it does in fact matter. If you're lucky, you have a garage that you can use over the amount of time that it will take you to complete your project. And ideally, the space is not only big enough to fit the project that you are working on, but also leave you with extra space to work on the different parts of the boat while the hull is hanging out somewhere in that space, and also while being able to walk around the boat. It also needs to be not too cold and not too warm, because outside of 60 degrees and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the epoxy doesn't cure as predictably, and also the space will get absolutely disgusting. It will be smelly, ranging from, whoa, I still smell like epoxy dust when I come home, to this anti-fouling is giving me a migraine.
Oh, it smells really bad. Whew. Awful, awful, awful.
It will also probably end up covered in all the good things like the dust, epoxy, paint, varnish, if you do not protect the floor well enough. So those are considerations to keep in mind as you decide where to build your project. We were lucky enough to have access to the Chesapeake Lightcraft shop, which is literally 5 minutes from where we live. And if you would like to build your boat there as well, Chesapeake Lightcraft offers boat building classes, which I wholeheartedly recommend, because the space is not only specifically designed for that purpose, it gives you access to all the tools and equipment that you'll need. Which brings me to my next point. Now, while the amount of tools we used was surprisingly minimal, I wasn't ready for the sheer amount of gloves and cups and other disposable that we went through. In terms of the tools, the orbital sander and the shop vac were probably the most important tools we used during our build, because as we've established now, I spent a solid 50% of my time sanding the boat. We also frequently used a router, a tool that rounds the edges of parts to make them perfectly smooth and even. We also used a drill, pliers, a rasp, some saws, some planers, but overall the tools that we used were not as many as I imagined it would be. Not like the clamps. Because whenever you laminate parts together, you need clamps and weight, and in no negligible amount. But that's still less than the amount of disposable that we went through, which I wasn't prepared for that. For each day that we spent building our boat, we probably went through at least 5 pairs of disposable gloves each, a dozen of mixing cups with mixing sticks and piping bag for the epoxy, a couple of epoxy spreaders, at least 4 or 5 chip brushes, filleting tools, a few rags to wipe the epoxy, and a bunch of denatured alcohol to clean up the boat from the dust. And countless sanding discs and rolls of sanding strips. So, if you are at the beginning of your project, I would recommend getting a huge amount of supplies, of everything, to keep their cost efficient. Which brings me to my next point that I should have really thought about before getting into this project, and I did not.
Now, we were really lucky and a big part of our DIY boat building project was sponsored. So for the sake of transparency, I will be adding markers on the screen for what was a product exchange, meaning that we didn't pay for it or paid for it at cost in exchange for features in the video that we will make about our boat build, and for what we paid for ourselves. So if you're about to get into a DIY boat build, you can also get an idea of the potential cost of such a project. And this is also a great timing to address a big thank you to the sponsors of this project, without whom it would not have been possible for us to build this boat and to create videos about it. So check them out at the links in the description of this video.
Chesapeake Lightcraft sells kits ranging from the low $1,000s for kayaks all the way to $5,500 for the Roadrunner. The kits come with all the supplies and the rigging, but you can also opt out and only buy the wood parts. Or if you have access to a CNC machine or big sawmill, I don't know. You can also buy the plans and manual and do it all yourself. So you bought the kit, you have the space, and you understand that you'll probably need to acquire a few tools and clamps and the massive supply of disposables. Now, when the boat is getting close to finish, you'll also need to get paint, varnish, and anti-fouling, depending on how you want the boat to look, because that does not come with the kit. And while the rigging comes with the kit, the propulsion did not. In our case, we chose to go with a 20 horsepower electric engine from Elco that cost $5,500, powered by 3 48-volt lithium batteries of 96 amp hour each from Dakota Lithium. Now, obviously, we had to buy some equipment for the boat, such as fenders, lines, safety equipment, and we also bought a trailer for $2,000. And wouldn't it be a shame to have this beautiful little piece of art without making some cute cushions for it and a cover to protect it? And of course, because we live in Maryland, we had to pay for the boat's registration and insurance. And I think there's like the dock space too that we're gonna try to get. And now for the biggest cost of all. And probably the #1 consideration to have when thinking about building a boat from a DIY kit, and that's of course, your time. As it turns out, the more experienced a boat builder is, the more time they tend to spend building their boat. I learned that from our friends here, and now looking back, it really resonates. Because as I learned how developing good skills impacts the overall result, I ended up spending an outrageous amount of time working on the details of our boat.
I think I've sanded away my soul.
Even when Andrew was satisfied with the result of our sanding, I would take an extra few hours to go through the boat and sand down any inconsistency, bump, or shiny spot. I spent a lot of time sanding. The Chesapeake Lightcraft catalog announces a build time of 250 hours for the Roadrunner. What I did not understand when I got into this project was that this meant ready to be finished, meaning that this time estimation takes you there. And I do not think that it includes making a bunch of mistakes or having to call Chesapeake Lightcraft to ask them to cut you a new transom because you accidentally laminated a piece of the dashboard to it. That did not happen. Or spending hours sanding the holes of the battery compartment's door because your partner let the clear coating dry with dozens of drips in it. Well, that happened. Do you remember that, Ryan? How do you feel about it? Do you have anything to say for your defense? I thought so. So between Ryan and myself, the learning curve, the mistakes, my obsessive sanding, and let's face it, my filming of every minute of this project, we ended up spending between 700 and 800 man-hours to get to this stage. And you may ask yourself, why not getting help from friends? Initially, before we started this project, we were thinking that we were going to involve a lot of our community here in Annapolis in this boat building process. And we did end up having some really nice friends coming to help. Now, not all of them had quite mastered the art of applying epoxy to avoid sanding, and I paid the price.
I mean, nothing says Happy Monday like a few good hours of sanding.
Now then, of course, there are the friends who came and spent their entire days sending our other friends strips, and well, I haven't heard from them in a while. So involving friends in the project meant that we either had to spend the time to teach them the proper skills or do a bunch of extra work. So in the first part of the project, we had a lot of friends coming to the shop, and in the second month, because we had a deadline by which we needed to be out of the shop, we did it ourselves. Now, by the time we had built, varnished, painted, installed the rigging, installed the equipment, and installed the engine so that we could test the boat, we had probably spent close to 900 man-hours on the boat. And that is why the kit cost $5,500, but getting one commission from Andrew would probably add a 0 to that number.
We do boats here, yeah.
But I loved building that boat. As someone who had never built anything before, I found the process incredibly rewarding, even in the moments when I couldn't take any more sanding. And there were a lot of those moments.
I'm a little dead inside.
I have rarely felt such a deep sense of accomplishment. Every time I take a look at our boat, I just can't believe that I built this. Now, we're not completely done with the little boat, and as a matter of fact, she doesn't even have a name yet. And I would love to hear your ideas. I'm probably going to organize a poll somewhere here on YouTube or on our website, I don't know yet. But Ryan likes Polar Pop, which is a reference to her big sister Paul Lucille, and I like Crab Cake, which is a reference to Annapolis and the Chesapeake Bay. So please go in the comment section and drop your ideas. We'd love to hear them. We will officially launch our new boat with her new name in mid-June. And if you would like to see her in real life, she will be at the Wooden Boat Show in Mystic, Connecticut in June and at the Annapolis Boat Show in October. Obviously, I have a lot more videos coming about those 900 man-hours that we spent, including how the building process went, how we made this little boat electric, which as it turns out was a lot more challenging than we thought it would be, how we turned the naked boat into this James Bond looking thing, and probably more. If you have any questions about the project, feel free to drop them in the comment section. We'll probably do a Q&A at some point. And if you are thinking about embarking on such a project, I would say, go for it. It's so fun. And also, yeah, let me know about your own build. I'd love to follow it. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Hi, it's Monday night, and this boat building project is the only thing that absolutely consumed my life for quite a period of time. This video did. This video was a monster to edit, to the point that I feel compelled to tell you about it, because making videos with 6 terabytes of footage captured over the course of 4 months full-time, that was a lot. So if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comment section. It would mean the world to me at this point. Thank you.